Okay, so everyone who is watching here right now, you know this about me, but I'm a student. And if you're not familiar with my degree, which is a master's in divinity, then it might sound a little bit strange to you. It's kind of hard. Masters of divinity, like what is divinity? That's a little hard to explain. When I'm introducing myself to people or telling this about myself to people, they'll be like, oh, is that like religion? Is that church? Is that Christianity? And I would say, yes, it's all of those, but I think more specifically or even more broadly, it's studying God, which is honestly kind of strange because I am paying all this money to go to school. And then at the end, I'm going to get this piece of paper that says, oh, you did it. You studied God rightly, whatever that means. And it's also really strange because as Christians, we should all be studying God, right? That's kind of the whole point, is to know God and to be known by God, to have this relationship. And it's the most important relationship we'll ever have, as we see it going on into eternity. But we're not really good at this. We're not really good at studying God. And when I say that, I don't mean studying God in the way that, I do in school, where I write papers and sometimes take tests, and take notes and all of that, but more about, we're not really great at getting to know who God is and what God is like, in a very personal way. So if I asked you this question of what is something like, if I asked you what church is like, your church, you'd be able to tell me. You could tell me what kind of music they play, what kind of people come, what sort of events throughout the week you have. You could tell me those things. If I asked you what Christianity is like, or Christians are like, you could tell me, Christians are nice people. Maybe that's not your experience, and you would tell me that they're hypocritical or they're judgmental. You could tell me what holidays Christians celebrate, what kind of book or text they read. You might be able to break those things down of what Christians are like or what the church is like. But it's a little bit harder to do this with God. If I asked you what God is like, what would you say? And not what God has done, because those might be a little bit easier to list. But what is God like? How would you describe God in the way you describe your best friend? For me, I would say about my best friend that she's super kind and caring. She's a little bit awkward, but she always makes people feel welcomed, and she reaches out to people, and checks on her friends. And I could list all these things of what my best friend is like, but can I do the same thing about God? Is that a little bit more challenging? So what's really cool that we get, because we should be doing this, right? We should be getting to know what God is like. And it's cool because we have the Bible to help us. I don't have mine by me, but we have this book, this Bible, that one of its main purposes is to help us know God, to help us understand who is authoring this story and why does he want something to do with humanity, and what role do we play in that, and who are we in light of who God is, right? But what do we really do with the Bible when it comes down to it most of the time? We tell ourselves, or we realize like, oh, I'm having a hard time, I'm having a bad day, I don't really understand my life right now. And then we go and we pick up the Bible and we flip some pages, we find something, we're like, wow, that was really helpful to me. This is how this is what I'm going through. And we use the Bible to figure ourselves out a lot of the time, which is okay, and which is good, and which is fine. But it doesn't make as much sense to do that if we're not also trying to figure out who the God is who's authoring this story, the one who's behind it all, who's authoring our lives. We kind of skip that step a lot of the time, and we go straight to like, what can this do for me? So how do we then go and get to know God better now? What do we do and as we want to continue and deepen this relationship and this knowing of who God is. So I want to answer that. I want to at least give some sort of direction towards an answer. And I want to do this by talking a little bit about the book of Job. So I know that most of you here, you probably, know enough about Job, or a general idea, but I will break the story down a little bit further. I also want to say that I think Job, there are plenty of verses and passages that we can pull from and draw from and learn from. But I do believe that Job is a story best told in its entirety when we see what's happening in this whole book. So I do want to sort of summarize and break down a few points of the book as we speak here today. I also want to challenge you who are listening to think about, if you've heard the story of Job before and you're super familiar with it, maybe put that aside for now and try to listen to it with fresh ears. And also try to think in this story, like as I tell it right now, of God as the main character. We think of Job and we're able to put ourselves in Job's shoes and identify with Job. But I think as we are challenging ourselves to get to know God better, let's try and see God as the main character and see what that does for us and how the Holy Spirit is able to speak to us through this story in a different way. So to get into the story, if you've read it, you know this, but again, try and listen with fresh ears. So the story of Job, we start off in this heavenly throne room type scene. It's almost as if we have God on the throne and all of these, if you want to say angels or workers or, messengers, servants, something like that. All these people, not humans, but people who are there, sort of going through their daily tasks, if that makes sense. It's almost like God is there, like everybody's reporting back, checking in, what's going on. And then this character walks in called the Satan, or the adversary, who comes, and it almost seems like, sneaks in the room a little bit. And God's like, hey, you, where have you been? Like, why are you late to this meeting, almost? And this Satan, this adversary, is like, roaming the earth, as if that's his job. I was just roaming the earth, just got back in. And God's like, have you thought about my servant Job? That guy on earth. You've probably seen him. He's so loyal to me. He's so righteous. Job is a wonderful guy. Have you thought about him? It's almost as if this adversary is supposed to think about these good people, or, some variation of that. And the adversary is like, yeah, I know Job. He's only good. He's only righteous and only faithful to you because you give him a lot of things. He has a lot of land. He has a lot of wealth and children and family, and his life is pretty secure. Like, why would he not be loyal to you? You've given him so much. If you were to take that away, I don't think Job would be who you think Job is. And God's like, I disagree, but let's see. So you, Satan, you adversary, you can go and do whatever you want to Job's life, as we test out this theory, but you just can't hurt him. Okay, so the adversary does it, the Satan does it, goes and sadly and tragically, destroys all of Job's crops, which is how he makes his living, destroys most of his servants, and then sadly and tragically destroys his children, and they face death. And obviously this is not a light test of any sort, and this Satan just wreaks havoc in Job's life, all with the permission of God. And Job despairs, but Job surprisingly continues to be faithful to God, and immediately starts grieving and looks to God in the midst of all that. So we go back to this heavenly throne room scene. The same thing sort of happens again. The Satan walks in. God says, "Where have you been?" And God again brings up Job, like, "Hey, Job did pretty well. He's still faithful to me." And the Satan's like, "Well, that's because you didn't let me hurt Job physically to his own body. You can take away his things, but once his life is at stake and Job's not going to be faithful to you, you still gave him his life." So God is like, "Okay, well, this time you can go and do whatever you want. If you need to physically harm him, go ahead. And just don't kill him. Just, spare his life, and that's it. Otherwise, do whatever." So the Satan takes God up on this test and goes and it causes physical pain through these like sores and aches to Job, which obviously is going to cause a lot of discomfort and pain. And again, surprisingly, Job turns to God. Job, who still has his wife, she's over here and she's like, "Well, how could you keep praising God? Look what he's done to our lives." And she's obviously not happy with him. But Job, even when his wife is against him, continues to pursue and go back to God. And this is sort of the setting up of the scene of these future discussions that are about to take place. So the discussions, we move into this portion of Job that is both at points poetic. It's also a little bit dialogue, conversation but because Job is facing tragedy and is hurt, his friends come to him. So Job's friends, they come to him, they sit with him in silence for 7 days, which is a long time to just give him his space, but still be there. 7 days, and they just mourn with him. They all are grieving. And then after these 7 days, Job speaks up, and it's not what maybe we would expect of this faithful person who's being characterized as so faithful and so righteous. Job is kind of like, "I don't get this. Why am I going through this? I am innocent. That's what I've been told. That's how I've lived. And we know that too, because that's what God said." And Job is like wrestling, and he's, "I thought good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. I thought that's what justice looked like." And Job begins to really question God's goodness. And to respond to that, his friends are like, "No, Job, that is how it works. Good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. When you do something good, you're rewarded. When you do something bad, you're punished. So obviously, Job, you've been punished pretty hard, so you must have done something wrong. You must deserve this, because we know God. We get God." And Job's not having it. That's not satisfying him, obviously. Even the last friend to speak up, he says, "Job, you should be happy that you're getting these lessons from God. Not everybody gets lessons like this." Which, if you know anything about grief and suffering, that's probably not, or is not, the best response to have when your friend is going through something hard. So Job, he comes back at his friends and says, "What you're saying about God, it doesn't really make sense. I think there must be something else going on here. I don't think we understand God like we think we do. I don't think we know God like we think we do." And his friends aren't really much help, even though that's a big part of the book. They don't really satisfy Job's suffering, his wondering, his pondering of what is going on in his life. So, because his friends are not really helping, Job starts talking to God directly, which, if you've been in a place of grief or suffering or pain, tragedy, this might be familiar to you. We go and we talk to God and we pray, and it's not always so pretty. And that's the case for Job too. Job comes to God and is sort of just like, "God, what gives? What is this? Why was I even born? why is this happening to me? God, you said that good things happen with good behavior and bad things happen with bad behavior, but God, I'm innocent, and this isn't justice. I'm going through horrible things. God, are you who you say you are? Do I even know you, God? Are you testing me? Are you going to help me? Where are you? And Job is really questioning, and he's doubting, and he's making claims, and he's wrestling with the identity of God. And if you've been in a place of suffering, again, you might resonate with this. This is where Job's at, and something really strange and cool happens. God responds to Job. Not all of us are so lucky for this clear response, but right, Job gets this response. And something that God says is, okay, Job, you've interrogated me. You've asked me so many questions, all these questions. Now it's my turn to interrogate you and ask you some questions. And if you go through the book in these chapters where Job is talking to God, God is asking him, do you know, how to make the birds fly? Do you know how to make the sun rise and set? All these very creation-like things. Job, do you know how to orchestrate justice in this world? Do you know, are you going to be the one who decides the fate of everybody and what is just and what is not, who is guilty, who is innocent? Because if you know all those things, Job, even I will bow down and worship you. And God has this moment of like, you know nothing of what's going on. And Job, he becomes very humbled by this. He says, I am not worthy. I don't even know what to say. I know that you can do anything, God. I shouldn't have asked. I shouldn't have even questioned. And that's what Job decides to say. But something really profound happens in chapter 42, verse 5. So God sort of turns that table on Job. Job just apologized, but God says, hang on. Your friends were wrong. Wrong for assuming that they knew who I was already. Job did rightly. Job questioned me, tried to figure me out, tried to undo some of the things that he thought he knew about me, and in the process got to know me more. So somehow in Job's questioning of God, making claims against God, wrestling with God, God revealed God's self to Job. And now Job knows God better than he would have if he had not asked those questions, if he had not wrestled in those ways. Job learned about God in ways that he had never even thought about. Because of this very dialogue, these very questions, Job knows God better. So this figuring out, what we can take away from this story is this figuring out of God, this questioning, it's welcomed. We are called, and we know this as being a part of this Christian tradition, that we are called to build a relationship with God, right? That we're trying to understand who God is in the same way you try to understand when you meet people, when you make friends, when you're in relationships, when you're getting to know your family better. You ask them questions. You try to figure them out in a way that you just wouldn't have if you were being passive about the relationship. You understand that there's more going on than you're probably ever going to be able to understand, and you get to know people better, and we want to get to know God better. So in this story, we also can take away that, God is a God who welcomes our questions, right? Who embraces these questions. God didn't say, Job, don't question me. God responded to those questions and gave some answers, invited Job into more questions and more answers. And I think there's been a lot of stigma around questioning God, and some people are very against it and say don't do it. But in this story, God is not afraid of Job's questions. It seems like Job is safe to ask these questions to God, It, God might even answer us when we do this, or maybe invite us into more questions like Job. But it's safe and it's okay, and you're welcome to ask God things and try and figure out more of who God is, because there is more to who God is. And that's one of the biggest takeaways I think we find in Job. And it's a story that continues to develop. And the more you experience things, the more we understand what it means to suffer. As we continue down this journey with God, this story is something that we can go back and reflect on and understand who God is more in light of whatever it is that we face. So I want to challenge all of you who are listening and watching to go and try and get to know God better. Don't be afraid of your questions. God is not afraid of your questions. Ask them, wrestle. We don't need to pretend like we have it all figured out right away. And it's okay to see that there is more to this story than we know. So I want to thank you all for listening. I'm going to go ahead and pray before we say goodbye today. So bow your heads, please. God, I want to thank you for creating us, for wanting something to do with us, for not ending it there, and for continuing on to stay with us as we go through the hardest moments of our life, as we go through the best moments of our life, God, and everywhere in between, as you allow us to see the beauty and the pain and all of it, and somehow we get to make sense of ourselves and of you in the midst of all that. I want to thank you for those opportunities in which we discover what it means to be alive, what it means to be created, what it means as we move forward towards an eternity with you, God. I want to thank you for all of those moments, all of those opportunities. God, I want to ask that you be with each of these people here who have watched and listened tonight, and that you stay close to them as they go through the good and the bad and the mundane and the exciting. God, I ask that you continue to reveal yourself to them as they move forward into this relationship with you, God. I want you to encourage them, Lord. Please encourage all of us to continue to ask our questions, to continue to build a relationship with you through questioning maybe the ways we've seen you before and how those are being challenged by our new experiences and our growth and our learning and our understanding. God, I ask that you, this sort of wisdom, that you just pour it on us, God, so that we can better and more loving and healthier and all that, be all those things as we navigate what it means to be in relationship with you, God. I ask that we don't have to go through the pain and the suffering that Job went through to gain this sort of wisdom and understanding of who you are, God. I ask that there be another way. But if there's not, God, then we ask that you stay close to us and you remind us that you are there as we go through these deep moments of suffering and pain, and that we recognize that this is something that, even though they never should have happened, that you are making beauty and making sense even when they do, God. I want to just pour this blessing of wisdom over all of us here tonight, and that we carry forward and we continue to look back to the story and look back to who you are and go deeper and deeper into discovering what it means to be wise and what it means to know you, God. We love you so much. Please continue to keep us safe and healthy as we move forward in this pandemic. And please be with those who are healing and needing more and more recovery, Lord. We love you so much, Lord. In your name, amen.